The sound came first, the sharp, panicked beeping of a heart monitor slicing through the emergency ward like a blade. BP dropping. Someone shouted, "Clear the airway now." Deborah was already moving before anyone called her name. The doors burst open as orderlies rushed the unconscious man in on a stretcher, his expensive suit rumpled, his face drained of color. Blood smeared the side of his mouth. His chest rose, then stalled, like it was forgetting how to breathe. "Get out of the way." A doctor barked. Deborah stepped aside, but her eyes never left the man. Something was wrong. Not the usual wrong. Not heart failure. Not stress collapse. Something deeper. Something she'd seen once before. In a place most of these doctors had never stepped foot in. Pulse is irregular. He's crashing. The beeping accelerated, frantic now that Deborah's fingers clenched inside her gloves. "Doctor," she said, her voice tight but steady. "Look at his pupils. And his skin. See the gray tone under. Not now." The senior doctor snapped without looking at her. "We know what we're doing." She swallowed hard. The man's head rolled slightly to the side, and for a brief second, Deborah caught a glimpse of his face. He looked powerful even in collapse. Sharp jawline. Expensive watch still clinging to his wrist. A man used to being obeyed. A rich man, she realized. Not that it mattered. Right now, he was dying. Charged to 200. The defibrillator paddles came down. His body jerked. Nothing. The monitor screamed. Deborah felt her heart pound so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. "This isn't just cardiac," she whispered to herself that she'd seen this once, years ago, in a rural clinic with flickering lights and no backup. A man who came in breathing but left the world within minutes because no one listened. "Not again. Doctor," she said louder now. "Please, this could be acute metabolic poisoning. If we don't." "I said enough." He snapped, turning on her. "You're a nurse. Stay in your place." The words hit harder than the shouting. "Stay in your place." She stepped back, but the fear wouldn't let her be silent, because the man on the stretcher gasped suddenly, violently, then went still, flatline. Everything froze for half a second. "Start CPR." Hands moved. Orders flew. Chaos returned. Deborah's mind raced. Gray skin. Dilated pupils. Sudden collapse mid-flight. The way his muscles had stiffened. She knew this pattern, and she knew the window was closing. Hours earlier, Deborah's shift had started like every other night. Quiet dread wrapped in fluorescent lights. She stood at the nurse's station, tying her hair back, scanning the duty roster. Another double shift. Another night of being invisible. "Deborah," one of the younger nurses called, barely looking up from her phone. "You're on emergency intake tonight." Deborah nodded. "All right." No complaint. No side. She'd learned long ago that complaining only made people notice you in the wrong ways. She walked down the corridor. The familiar smells of antiseptic and exhaustion clung to her. She'd worked in this hospital for 3 years now, yet she still felt like a visitor. Tolerated, not trusted. Her accent never fully disappeared when she spoke. Her skin marked her as different before she ever opened her mouth. "You're good with patients," one doctor had once told her. "But leave the thinking to us." She never forgot that. The night was barely settling when the emergency call came in. Emergency landing. Private jet. One male patient, critical condition. The hospital buzzed instantly. A private jet. Someone whispered, "Must be important." Deborah watched the shift change around her. The sudden urgency, the straightening of backs, the quiet excitement. Rich patients changed everything. The ambulance arrived minutes later, sirens wailing. And then he was there, the Korean man. Though no one said his name yet, the air around him screamed money. His tailored suit, even rumpled, probably cost more than Deborah earned in a year. The watch glinted under the harsh lights. "Careful," a doctor said. "He's high profile." High profile. Deborah bit back a bitter thought. Would they be this careful if he weren't? She focused on her work, taking vitals, noting everything. That was when she saw it. The subtle twitch in his fingers, the unnatural stiffness creeping through his body. Her stomach tightened. This wasn't normal. She leaned closer, her voice low. "Sir? Can you hear me?" No response. Blood pressure falling. She called out. The senior doctor nodded briskly. "Prep for cardiac intervention." Deborah hesitated. "Doctor," she said carefully. "Has anyone considered?" He cut her off with a raised hand. Later. Later never came. Now, standing in the emergency ward with the monitor screaming its warning. Deborah felt the weight of that dismissal like a stone on her chest if she stayed silent. He would die. If she acted, she might lose everything. Another round. The doctor shouted. Deborah's hands trembled. She thought of her mother's voice years ago, back home, that if you know the truth, speak it. Even if your voice shakes. She stepped forward. Doctor, listen to me, she said, her voice breaking through the chaos. This looks like acute poisoning or metabolic shock. Cardiac shocks won't fix it. We need to counteract it now, or security. The doctor yelled, furious. Get her out if she interferes again. The room went silent for half a breath. Deborah froze. Interferes. She looked at the man on the bed, this stranger whose life was slipping away while titles and pride stood in the way. Her hands moved before her fear could stop them. She reached for the medication tray. What are you doing? Someone gasped. Deborah's heart pounded so hard it hurt. I've seen this before, she said, her voice shaking but determined. If I'm wrong, you can fire me. But if I'm right and we wait, he dies. The doctor turned red with rage. You are not authorized. I know, she whispered. She administered the emergency intervention with hands trained by years of scarcity and improvisation, not textbooks alone. Every second stretched like a lifetime. The monitor flickered for a terrifying moment. Nothing changed. Then, the line jumped out. A slow, fragile rhythm appeared. Beep, beep. The room exhaled in disbelief. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." The doctor stared at the monitor like it had betrayed him. Deborah sagged slightly, gripping the edge of the bed to stay upright. He was alive. But even as relief washed over her, fear followed close behind, because she knew what came next. By morning, the adrenaline had faded, leaving only consequences. Deborah stood in the administrative office, hands clasped tightly in front of her. You broke protocol, the hospital administrator said coldly. I was trying to save his life. Deborah replied quietly. That is not your decision to make. The senior doctor wouldn't meet her eyes. You embarrassed the department, the administrator continued. If the patient had died, but he didn't, Deborah said, her voice barely above a whispered pause. That's irrelevant, the woman snapped. You will be written up for insubordination. Suspension is being considered. Deborah felt something inside her crack. She nodded slowly. Understood. As she left the office, the corridor felt longer than ever. Nurses avoided her gaze. Whispers followed her footsteps. She reached the locker room, sat down heavily on the bench, and finally let the tears come. She had done the right thing, hadn't she? Across the hospital, in a private room guarded by quiet security, the rich Korean man stirred. His eyes fluttered open. Confusion clouded his gaze as machines hummed around him. He swallowed painfully and whispered his first words since the collapse. Who saved me? The room was quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the distant echo of footsteps in the hallway at MR. Kang's eyes adjusted slowly. White ceiling, dim lights, the faint smell of disinfectant. He tried to move his hand and felt resistance. Tubes, wires, a foreign heaviness in his body. Where am I? He croaked as a nurse rushed to his side. Sir, please don't move. You're in the hospital. You had a medical emergency. A hospital? His brow furrowed. Where's my assistant? They're contacting your team, she said carefully. You're safe now. Safe. The word felt strange in his mouth. Fragments returned in flashes. The plane, the sudden pain, the way his chest tightened like a fist closing around his heart. Then darkness that he swallowed again. Someone saved me. The nurse hesitated. Yes, she said slowly. You were stabilized last night. Mr. Kang's eye sharpened. Who? Another pause. It was Nurse Deborah, she said. Finally, Deborah, he repeated softly. The name stayed with him long after the nurse left. Deborah didn't sleep that morning. She sat on the edge of her bed in her small apartment, still in her uniform, staring at the wall as sunlight crept through the thin curtains. Her phone lay face down beside her, silent, no calls, no messages. Just the echo of the administrator's voice. Suspension is being considered. She pressed her palms into her eyes that she'd crossed a line. She knew that. In this system, rules mattered more than results. Titles mattered more than truth. Yet when she closed her eyes, she still saw the monitor jump back to life. Still heard that fragile beep that meant a man was breathing again, that if she had to choose again, she would do the same thing. That a knock sounded at her door. Deborah froze. Another knock. Firmer this time. Her heart raced. Had the hospital sent someone already? She stood slowly and opened the door. That it was her neighbor, an older woman with tired eyes and a kind smile. You didn't come home last night, she said gently. I heard the ambulance earlier. I thought, are you okay? Deborah nodded, forcing a smile. I'm fine. The woman studied her face. You don't look fine. Deborah exhaled shakily. I may have lost my job. The smile faded. What? I did what I thought was right, Deborah whispered. But doing the right thing doesn't always protect you. The woman reached out and squeezed her arm. Whatever happens, she said, you saved someone. That matters. Deborah wished the world agreed. Back at the hospital, Mr. Kong sat upright now, color slowly returning to his face. His personal physician, flown in overnight, stood at the foot of the bed reviewing reports with the local doctors. This intervention, the physician said, tapping the file, was unconventional. The senior doctor stiffened. Yes, but effective, the physician finished calmly. If this treatment had been delayed, he likely wouldn't be here. The room fell silent. Mr. Kong watched their faces closely. Find her, he said suddenly. The doctors turned toward him. Sir. The nurse, he said. Deborah, I want to see her. A flicker of discomfort passed between them. She's not on duty, the senior doctor said. Mr. King's gaze hardened. Why? Another pause. There was a breach of protocol, the administrator said carefully. We are reviewing her conduct. Reviewing? Mr. Kong repeated. He shifted, ignoring the twinge of pain in his chest. Let me understand something, he said quietly. I collapse. I am dying. Doctors follow procedure. It fails. No one spoke. Then one nurse acts. He continued, his voice steady but sharp. I am alive. He looked directly at the senior doctor. And you are reviewing her? No answer. Bring her to me, Mr. Kong said. Now. Deborah was folding her uniform when her phone finally rang. Her breath caught. Yes? She answered cautiously. Deborah, a stiff voice said. This is hospital administration. You are required to return immediately. Her stomach dropped. Is this about my suspension? There has been a development, the voice replied. The patient you treated has requested to see you. Her hand trembled. He's awake. Yes. Silence stretched between them. And Deborah, the administrator added. Tone clipped. Be mindful of what you say. The line went dead. Deborah sat there for a long moment. Phone pressed to her ear. Then she stood. The hospital corridors felt different as she walked them again. Quieter. Heavier. Eyes followed her. Whispers rippled. That's her. She's the one who. Is she fired? Deborah kept her head down. When she reached the private wing, security stopped her. Name? Deborah. They checked a list, then stepped aside without a word. The room was large and immaculately clean. Mr. Kong sat propped up in bed, dressed now in a crisp robe, looking far more alive than the man she'd seen on the stretcher. Their eyes met. For a moment. Neither spoke. Then he broke the silence. You're Deborah. She nodded, hands clasped tightly in front of her. Yes, sir. You saved my life, he said simply. Her throat tightened. I did my job. No, he replied. You did more than your job. She swallowed. I acted without authorization. A faint smile touched his lips. Sometimes rules protect people. Sometimes they protect fear. The doctors shifted uncomfortably behind her. Mr. Kong studied her face. Where did you learn to do what you did? Deborah hesitated, then answered honestly. Back home. In clinics where we didn't have enough machines. We learned to watch the body. To listen. And they dismissed you, he said, glancing at the others. Because you are just a nurse. The words stung even spoken by someone else. Yes, she said quietly. Mr. Kong turned to the administrator. Is she employed here? The administrator cleared her throat. At present, she is under review. Cancel the review, Mr. Kong said. The room went still. Sir, the administrator began. With respect, hospital policy. With respect, he interrupted. His voice firm now. I am alive because she ignored your policy. No one argued. Mr. Kong looked back at Deborah. You risked your career for someone you didn't know. What? Deborah felt her eyes burn. Because he was a patient, she said. And because I knew I could help. A long silence followed. Mr. Kong nodded slowly. You remind me of someone, he said. Someone I used to be. He reached for a glass of water, took a sip, then said quietly, I owe you a debt. Deborah shook her head quickly. I don't want anything. He smiled slightly. That is why you deserve everything. By the end of the day, Deborah's suspension was quietly lifted, but whispers remained. Some doctors avoided her entirely. Others looked at her with something new, unease, perhaps, or respect. She returned to work, but nothing felt the same. Days passed at MR. Kong recovered quickly. Too quickly, some said. Before his discharge, he asked one final question. What do you plan to do, Deborah? He asked as she checked his vitals. She paused. I wanted to finish medical school, she admitted softly. But life happened. Life? He echoed. He watched her for a moment. And if life stepped aside? She met his gaze, unsure what he meant. You will hear from me, he said. Weeks later, Deborah stood in the locker room again, but this time, her hands shook for a different reason. That she'd received a letter, thick, cream-colored. No, return address. Inside was a single sentence. Please, come to the hospital tomorrow at noon. Her heart raced. She didn't know why, but she felt it. Something was coming. Deborah barely slept that night. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling. The letter folded and unfolded so many times it was soft at the edges. Noon tomorrow. No explanation. No signature. Just certainty pressed into paper. BY morning. The sky was heavy with clouds. She dressed slowly, choosing her plainest uniform, tying her hair back with trembling fingers. She told herself it was probably nothing. A formality. A thank you. A handshake and goodbye. Still, her heart wouldn't listen. When she arrived at the hospital, something felt wrong immediately. Too quiet. Too many people gathered near the entrance. Nurses stood in small clusters, whispering. Doctors lingered where they normally rushed past. Security guards lined the driveway. Unusually alert, Deborah slowed her steps. Then she heard it. The low hum of engines that a convoy of black luxury vehicles rolled through the gates, polished to a mirror shine. They moved slowly, deliberately, like a procession. The hospital seemed to hold its breath. People stared. Who is that? Is that? No way. The first car stopped. A door opened. MR. Kong stepped out, not in a hospital robe this time, but in a tailored suit, dark and sharp, his posture straight, his movements confident. He looked nothing like a man who had nearly died weeks earlier. He looked like power. Behind him, more cars opened. Assistants. Security. A man carrying a slim leather briefcase. Another holding a folder thick with documents. The whispers grew louder. That's him. The patient. The billionaire. Deborah stood frozen near the edge of the crowd, her pulse roaring in her ears. She hadn't expected this. MR. Kong scanned the crowd calmly. Then his eyes found her. He smiled. He walked toward her. Every step felt impossibly loud. Deborah's mouth went dry. She straightened instinctively, unsure whether to bow, speak, or disappear. He stopped in front of her. Good afternoon, Deborah, he said warmly. Good afternoon, sir, she replied. Her voice barely steadied. He turned slightly so others could hear. Doctors, administrators, nurses, staff, who had once ignored her. This is the woman who saved my life, he said. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Deborah felt heat rush to her face. MR. Kong continued, his voice calm but carrying weight. When I collapsed, many people followed protocol. One person followed truth. He looked at the senior doctor, then at the administrator. She saw what others missed, he said, and she acted when others hesitated. Silence fell. Deborah's hands clenched at her sides. I was told she was punished for this, Mr. Kong went on, that she was nearly dismissed. The administrator shifted uncomfortably. There were procedural concerns. Mr. Kong raised a hand. Procedures did not save me, he said evenly. She did. He turned back to Deborah. You once told me you didn't want anything, he said. She nodded, throat tight. That made me curious, he continued. So I asked questions. Her breath caught. I learned about your studies, he said. About how you left medical school because you could no longer afford it. About how you send most of your salary home. About how you never complain. Deborah's eyes burned. I learned, he said, that talent is often ignored when it doesn't come wrapped in authority. He gestured, and the man with the briefcase stepped forward, opening it. Inside were documents.mr. Kong took one and handed it to her. This, he said, is a full scholarship. Tuition, living expenses, everything. You will finish medical school. Gasps erupted around them. Deborah stared at the paper, her vision blurring. Sir, I don't understand. You will, he said gently. In time. He handed her another document. And this, he continued, is a donation to this hospital. New equipment, training programs, emergency response funding. The administrator's eyes widened, but, Mr. Kong added, his tone sharpening slightly, it is made in Deborah's name. The crowd went still. Deborah shook her head, tears spilling now. Please, she whispered. I didn't do this for, I know, he said softly. That is why it matters. He looked around at the gathered staff. Let this be clear, he said. From today forward, Deborah is not invisible. She is indispensable. The word landed heavy and final. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger. Some clapped out of relief, some out of admiration, some because they finally understood Deborah couldn't move.mr. Kong leaned closer and lowered his voice. There is one more thing. She looked up at him. I am funding a medical outreach program, he said. Clinics in places that are often forgotten. I would like you to lead it when you are ready. Her breath hitched. Me? Tears streamed freely now. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered.mr. Kong smiled. You already did. On a night when no one was listening. Later, when the crowd dispersed and the convoy pulled away, Deborah sat alone in the locker room, the same bench, the same lockers. Everything else was different. She held the scholarship papers in her hands, still half convinced they would vanish if she blinked too long. The door creaked open. The senior doctor stepped in. Hesitating. Deborah, he said quietly. She looked up. I was wrong, he admitted. And I'm sorry. She studied his face for a long moment. Thank you, she said finally. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a beginning. Months passed. Deborah returned to school. Long nights became longer. Exhaustion returned. But this time, it carried purpose. She visited the hospital often, sometimes as a nurse, sometimes as a student doctor in training. The looks she received were different now. Not pity, not dismissal, respect. Letters arrived from clinics being built, from nurses being trained, from patients who would never know her name, but would live because of what she'd done. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Deborah stood outside the hospital and watched the sunset bleed into the sky. She remembered that first night. The beeping monitor. The words thrown at her like a wall. Stay in your place. She smiled faintly. Her place, she had learned, was wherever she chose to stand, across the ocean, in a glass-walled office overlooking a city of lights. Mr. Kong watched a report play silently on a screen, images of clinics opening, nurses working, lives being saved. He leaned back, thoughtful. Saving one life had changed two. And somewhere between ignored and indispensable, a truth had revealed itself. Sometimes, the world doesn't recognize greatness when it walks quietly through the door. Sometimes, it takes a life on the line to make people listen. And sometimes, all it takes is one person brave enough to speak when no one else will.